Please, I just need 5 minutes to play. It traveled 1,500 miles for this. Grace Madison begged head judge Victoria Sterling at Adelphia Hall's audition stage. Her concert dress was wrinkled from an 18-hour Greyhound bus ride through 3 states. Victoria called her a vagrant farm girl and ordered security to drag her out immediately. Grace was 5 minutes late because she'd given her last plane seat to a dying woman's husband. What Victoria didn't know was that man was watching from the owner's box right now. William Ashford was Adelphia Hall's chairman, and he was about to destroy Victoria's career. Before watching, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The thunderstorm over Tulsa International Airport shook the terminal windows like an angry giant rattling cage bars. Grace Madison stood at the ticket counter, her knuckles white as she gripped her worn passport. Lightning illuminated the chaos around her. Canceled flight displays, crying children, businessmen shouting into phones desperately. "I can get you on the last flight to JFK," the agent shouted over the thunder. "But this is the absolute last seat available. Everything else is grounded until morning at earliest." Grace let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 15 years straight. 15 years of teaching piano lessons in a converted barn on her family's failing Oklahoma farm. 15 years of saving every single penny from her mother's exhausting sewing factory work in town. 15 years of dreaming about this one moment, this one chance to prove she belonged somewhere bigger. "I'll take it," Grace said, slapping her credit card on the counter with shaking fingers. This ticket wasn't just transportation. It was her entire future folded into a boarding pass. Her mother was in Tulsa General Hospital right now, stable but weak after the pneumonia diagnosis. The medical bills were already crushing them, $180,000 and climbing every single day. The Adelphia Foundation fellowship included a $50,000 prize that could buy her mother 6 more months of life. "Go, Gracie," her mother had whispered that morning, her voice thin as tissue paper through the oxygen mask. "Play for me. Play for both of us. Show them what you are." Grace took the boarding pass with trembling hands, staring at the printed letters. Seat 12A, departure 6:15 p.m. She turned to head toward security, clutching her sheet music portfolio to her chest like armor. That was when she heard the sobbing, raw and desperate, cutting through the airport chaos like a knife. An elderly man in a rumpled gray suit was leaning against the counter next to her position. He looked like he was physically collapsing, his entire body weight supported only by his hands on the counter. His face was buried in his palms, and his shoulders shook with the kind of grief that had no dignity left. "Please," the man begged the agent, his voice breaking on every syllable. "There has to be another way. Another seat. Another flight. Anything." "I'm so sorry, sir," the agent said with genuine sympathy, her professional mask cracking slightly. "That lady just purchased the last available seat. There's literally nothing else until tomorrow morning." The man turned slowly, as if movement itself required more energy than he possessed in that moment. His eyes were red and swollen, desperatine, a way that made Grace's chest tighten with recognition. "Miss," he choked out, his voice raw from crying. "My name is William. My wife Rose, she's in Mount Sinai in Manhattan. The doctors called me 30 minutes ago. They say she won't make it through the night. I have to hold her hand one last time. I have to tell her I love her. Please, I'll pay you anything, $10,000, 20, whatever you need." Grace looked at the man and saw the raw, terrifying grief that she recognized from her own mirror. This was what she looked like every time she visited her mother's hospital room in Tulsa. Then she looked down at her boarding pass, at the printed seat number that represented everything. Seat 12A, her dream, her mother's medical bills, her entire future compressed into 3 characters. If she gave up this seat, she would miss the audition at Adelphia Hall tomorrow morning. She would miss the only chance she'd ever have to escape the barn, the debt, the suffocating smallness. The fellowship auditions happened once every 5 years, and she was already 28 years old. There wouldn't be another chance, not for someone like her, not for a farm girl with no connections. But then she thought of her own mother lying in that hospital bed with tubes and wires. If her mother were dying tonight instead of next month, Grace would want someone to help her get there. She would want someone, anyone, to show mercy to a desperate stranger with nowhere else to turn. The silence stretched between them, heavy as the storm clouds pressing against the terminal windows outside. Grace looked at William's face, at the way his hands shook as he gripped the counter for support. She looked at the boarding pass in her own hands, feeling its weight like an anchor pulling her under. She thought about her mother saying play for both of us just 6 hours ago. She thought about what her mother would tell her to do if she were standing here right now. Her mother would tell her that some things mattered more than dreams, more than money, more than opportunity. Her mother would tell her that being a good person was more important than being a famous pianist. Grace felt something inside her chest crack open, painful and clean, like ice breaking in spring. "You don't have to pay me anything," Grace said softly, extending the boarding pass toward William. "Go to her. Tell Rose she is loved. Tell her she's not alone." William stared at her as if she'd just spoken a foreign language he couldn't possibly understand. I don't know what to say," he wept, taking the ticket with hands that couldn't stop shaking. Thank you. God bless you. I can't." "Just go," Grace urged him gently, feeling tears starting to burn behind her own eyes now. "Don't waste another second. Run." "What is your name?" William asked, gripping her hand for just a moment, looking into her face desperately. "Grace," she said simply. "Just Grace. From Oklahoma." "I will never forget this. Grace from Oklahoma," William promised, his voice breaking again. "Never. I swear to God I will never forget what you just did." He ran toward the security gate, stumbling slightly, the boarding pass clutched in his fists like salvation itself. Grace watched him disappear into the crowd, feeling a piece of her heart break off and follow him. She walked slowly over to the terminal window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass. 10 minutes later, she watched the Planet taxi onto the runway through sheets of rain. Her dream was taking off without her, climbing into the storm, disappearing into the dark clouds. But she couldn't stop now. Couldn't give up after 15 years of work and saving and hoping. She had to find another way to get to Manhattan, had to make it to that audition somehow. "When is the next bus to New York City?" she asked the agent, her voice surprisingly steady. The agent checked her computer screen, her expression sympathetic and slightly pitying at the same time. "Greyhound departs at 7 p.m., arrives Port Authority tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Grace looked at her phone. The audition slot was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. at Adelphia Hall. If she ran from the bus terminal, if nothing went wrong, if the universe showed her mercy. "I'll take a ticket," Grace said, pulling out her credit card again with hands that had stopped shaking. The Greyhound bus smelled like stale coffee, diesel fumes, and the accumulated sweat of 100 desperate travelers. Grace sat squeezed between a window and a large man, whose snoring sounded like a chainsaw cutting wet wood. The bus rattled and shook over every bump in the highway, jolting her tired body against the hard seat. She tried to sleep, but anxiety kept her eyes wide open, staring at her own reflection in the dark window. She rehearsed Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in her mind, her fingers moving on her lap unconsciously. Her hands played the complex passages on invisible keys, muscle memory stronger than exhaustion or fear. 18 hours. That was how long this journey would take from Tulsa to Manhattan by Greyhound bus. 18 hours of stops in small towns, crying babies, stiff legs, and the constant smell of diesel. 4 hours into the journey, somewhere outside Crossroads City, the bus made a mechanical grinding sound. The driver pulled over to the shoulder, and everyone groaned as he announced a 30-minute mechanical delay. Grace pulled out her phone and opened the piano keyboard app she'd downloaded years ago for practice. She put in her earbuds and began playing scales silently, her fingers tapping the screen with practiced rhythm. The man next to her woke up and stared at her like she was insane, tapping a phone screen over and over. "Piano practice," Grace explained quietly, not stopping her fingers from their relentless scales and arpeggios. The man shook his head and went back to sleep while Grace continued practicing on a screen. 11 hours into the journey, at the Pittsburgh transfer station, disaster struck in the form of coffee. A businessman rushing to make his connection slammed into Grace, his large coffee cup flying from his hand. The hot liquid splashed across the front of her black concert dress, the careful work of her mother ruined. "Watch where you're going," the man shouted at her, as if the collision were somehow her fault. Grace stood frozen, looking down at the brown stain spreading across the fabric like a wound opening. This was the dress her mother had sewn by hand, staying up 3 nights straight despite her illness. This was supposed to be Grace's armor, her transformation from farm girl into serious artist. She ran to the bus station bathroom, fighting back tears, and tried desperately to wash out the stain. The harsh fluorescent lights made hair reflection look ghoulish, exhausted, desperate, falling apart at the seams. She scrubbed at the fabric with wet paper towels, but the stain only spread wider and darker. "Was it worth it?" she whispered to hair reflection, feeling doubt creep in like cold water. "Giving up the flight? 15 years of work? Is this what I was meant to do?" Her reflection had no answer, just stared back with red, tired eyes in a dirty bus station bathroom. Then she remembered William's face, the desperate gratitude in his eyes when she handed him that ticket. She remembered thinking about her own mother and knowing, absolutely knowing, she'd made the right choice. "It was worth it," she told her reflection firmly, wiping away the tears with the back of her hand. "Even if I fail, even if I don't make it, it was worth it." She returned to the bus with the stain still visible, a dark mark of failure on her carefully prepared armor. 16 hours into the journey, somewhere on the final stretch approaching Manhattan, Grace saw something that steadied her. An elderly couple sat across the aisle, sleeping with their heads resting against each other's shoulders gently. The woman's hand was clasped in the policeman's hand, their fingers intertwined even in sleep, even after what looked like decades. Grace thought about William running through that airport to catch the plane to his dying wife, Rose. She thought about how that couple would want someone to help them if they were desperate and alone. She thought about her mother saying, "Show them what you are," and realized her mother meant her character, not just her talent. When the bus finally pulled into Port Authority in Manhattan, it was 8:45 in the morning. Her audition slot at Adelphia Hall was at 9:30, which meant she had exactly 45 minutes. She grabbed her bag and ran through the chaos of the terminal, like her life depended on speed alone. The humidity of New York in summer made her hair frizz immediately, and sweat trickled down her back. She didn't look like a virtuoso pianist preparing for the audition of her lifetime at a prestigious hall. She looked like a desperate tourist who had gotten lost and was running from something terrible behind her. Adelphia Hall loomed ahead of her, a magnificent temple of brick and limestone rising above the city streets. It was where legends had played for over a century, where careers were made and destroyed in single performances. She burst through the stage door entrance seat 928, gasping for air, her bag heavy on her shoulder. "Name?" the security guard asked, looking her up and down with concealed skepticism and judgment. "Grace Madison," she panted, trying to catch her breath enough to speak clearly. "I'm here for the Adelphia Foundation Fellowship audition." The guard checked his clipboard slowly, making her wait, his expression suggesting he already knew the answer. "You're late," he said flatly, as if this were a crime worthy of immediate execution. "Please," Grace begged, her voice coming out more desperate than she'd intended it to sound. "My bus. There was a storm. I came from Oklahoma." "Go inside," he muttered, finally buzzing her through with obvious reluctance. "But don't expect a warm welcome from M's. Sterling." Grace ran down the hallway toward the main auditorium, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors. She could hear the silence of the theater ahead, the kind of silence that meant auditions were ending. She pushed open the heavy double doors and stumbled into the stage wing, breathing hard and sweating. The theater was vast, empty, and terrifyingly beautiful in the way that only historic performance spaces can be. Rows of red velvet seats stretched back into shadows, and the ceiling arched overhead like a cathedral. In the center of the stage stood an imperial grand piano, black and gleaming under the stage lights. Sitting at a table in the front row was a woman with ice blonde hair pulled back severely. Victoria Sterling, the head judge of the Adelphia Foundation, the gatekeeper who decided who had a future. "Who are you?" Victoria asked, her voice echoing in the hall with cold precision and immediate dismissal. "Grace Madison," Grace said, walking onto the stage with as much dignity as she could gather. "I'm here to audition for the fellowship." Victoria looked at her watch with exaggerated slowness, then at Grace's wrinkled, stained dress with visible disgust. She let out a short, cruel laugh that echoed off the walls like broken glass falling on marble. "You're the girl from Oklahoma?" Victoria asked, checking her notes, as if hoping there'd been some mistake. "Yes, ma'am," Grace said, trying desperately to smooth her skirt with shaking hands. Victoria stared at her for a long moment, taking in every detail of her disheveled appearance with surgical precision. "You look like you slept in a dumpster behind a bus station. Did you?" Grace felt her face flush hot with humiliation and exhaustion, and the weight of 18 hours traveling. "I took the bus, ma'am," Grace explained, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts at control. "There were no flights available because of the storm. I left yesterday evening from Tulsa." "Excuses are the anthem of the incompetent, Ms. Madison," Victoria declared, as if this were an established fact. "This is Adelphia Hall, not a county fair livestock show where you can waltz in covered in dirt. We expect professionalism here. Punctuality, presentation, standards that separate artists from amateurs. You have demonstrated none of these equalities. Not a single one. Please, just let me play," Grace pleaded, hearing the desperation in her own voice and hating it. "Just give me 5 minutes. Let me show you what I can do." "I don't need to hear you play," Victoria sneered, standing up from her table and crossing her arms. "I can smell the desperation from here, and it reeks like diesel fuel and failed dreams." Adelphia Hall was built for Victor Adelstein and Helena Moreau, not county fair prize winners. You can't hear the difference between an imperial grand and a toy keyboard when you learned on a barn spinet. Grace felt a hot tear slide down her cheek, cutting a clean line through the dust on her face. All the sacrifice. The ticket she gave away, William running through the airport, the 18-hour bus ride. Was it all for nothing? To be insulted by a woman who knew nothing about her except what she looked like? "I earned this audition," Grace said, her voice gaining strength from somewhere deep and previously untapped. "I sent you my performance recordings. You invited me here. You accepted my application." "I invited a pianist, not a vagrant, who wandered in off the street," Victoria snapped with increasing venom. "Security!" she shouted toward the wings, her voice sharp and commanding and final. 2 large security guards stepped out from the shadows on either side of the stage, moving toward Grace. "Escort this woman out of the building." "She's trespassing on private property," Victoria ordered coldly. Grace looked at the imperial grand piano sitting there on the stage, just 10 feet away from her position. It was right there, close enough to touch, close enough to reach, if she just moved fast enough. If she left now without playing, without touching those keys, she would never forgive herself for the rest of her life. She didn't walk toward the exit where the guards were waiting to escort her out with force. Instead, she ran toward the piano bench, dropping her bag on the floor as she moved. "Stop her!" Victoria shrieked, her composure finally cracking into something ugly and genuinely angry. Grace threw herself onto the bench and reached for the piano lid to open it fully. "Don't you dare touch those keys," Victoria yelled, running up the stage stairs toward her. The guards were running too, their heavy boots thudding on the wooden stage floor, closing the distance fast. Grace closed her eyes tightly, blocking out everything except the memory of her mother's face this morning. She took one deep breath, filling her lungs completely, centering herself the way she'd practiced for 15 years. She didn't think about Victoria, or the guards, or the fact that she was about to be dragged away. She thought about her mother lying in that hospital bed, saying, "Play for both of us." She thought about William's face when she handed him that boarding pass, about Rose dying alone without him. She thought about the couple on the bus sleeping, with their hands intertwined, about love being worth sacrifice. She raised her hands above the keys, positioning them exactly the way her first teacher had shown her 20 years ago. Grace slammed her hands down on the keys with every ounce of power she possessed in her exhausted body. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 exploded into the vast space like a thunderstorm breaking. It wasn't just music. It was a scream, a prayer, a declaration of war against everyone who'd ever dismissed her. The sound was so powerful, so sudden and overwhelming, that even the running guards hesitated for a split second. Grace poured every ounce of her frustration, her exhaustion, her grief, her hope into the instrument before her. Her fingers flew across the keys, blurring with speed and precision that came from muscle memory deeper than thought. The music was angry and dark and beautiful all at once, a perfect storm of human emotion translated into sound. It told the story of the actual storm in Tulsa, of watching the plane take off, of the endless bus ride through darkness. It was the sound of a heart breaking and healing simultaneously, of sacrifice and hope intertwined impossibly. Even Victoria stood frozen for just a moment, genuinely shocked by the sheer volume and power coming from this small woman. But her pride and anger quickly overrode whatever musical recognition tried to surface in her professionally trained ears. "I said stop!" Victoria screamed over the music, her voice audible over the cascade of notes. She marched up the stairs onto the stage, her heels clicking sharply, her face twisted with rage. Grace kept playing, her eyes closed, completely lost in the melody that had lived inside her for years. She was in the zone now, that place where no one could hurt her, where only the music existed. Victoria reached the piano and grabbed the heavy wooden lid with both hands, her knuckles white with fury. "Get out of my hall!" she yelled, her face inches from Grace's, spittle flying with the force of her words. She slammed the lid down with shocking, violent force, the massive wood crashing like a coffin closing forever. Grace yanked her hands back just in time, missing, being crushed by less than a second of reflexes. The music cut off instantly, leaving a ringing, devastating silence that filled the enormous hall like poison gas. Grace sat there on the bench, breathing hard, staring at the closed piano lid in front of her. Her hands were still hovering in mid-air above the keys, frozen in playing position, trembling with adrenaline. "You are finished," Victoria hissed, her face inches from Grace's, her breath hot with rage and something like fear. "You will never play in New York again. I will make sure of it personally. I will contact every hall, every venue, every music school. They will all know your name. You will be blacklisted as the vagrant who trespassed and assaulted me at Adelphia Hall." "Get her out of my sight!" Victoria ordered the guards again, her voice shaking with fury. The guards grabbed Grace by both arms roughly, pulling her up from the bench with unnecessary force. Grace didn't fight them, didn't struggle, just let them lift her to her feet with mechanical compliance. She looked at Victoria with a quiet dignity that somehow made the older woman even more furious. "You can stop the music," Grace said softly, her voice surprisingly steady despite everything. "But you can't stop the truth." "Get her out!" Victoria screeched, her composure completely shattered now, no longer pretending at sophistication. "Unhand her immediately." A voice boomed from the darkness of the private balcony above the stage. It was deep, commanding, filled with authority and controlled rage, and it shook the walls like thunder. Everyone on stage froze instantly, even Victoria, looking up toward the sound with genuine fear in her eyes. The guards released Grace's arms immediately, sensing the massive shift in power dynamics happening right now. "Who is shouting at me?" Victoria demanded, trying to regain her composure and authority through volume alone. "Show yourself. This is a private audition." A figure stepped out of the shadows of the owner's box balcony, moving slowly into the light. He walked down the curved balcony stairs with measured, deliberate steps, every movement heavy with grief and purpose. He was wearing a black morning suit that looked like he'd slept in it for days straight. It was William, the man from the airport, but transformed somehow by exhaustion and loss and determination. The guards backed away from Grace completely, their training telling them that whoever this was commanded absolute authority here. Victoria squinted up into the balcony area, her confident sneer beginning to crack at the edges. "Chairman?" she whispered, her face visibly draining of color in the stage lights. Chairman Ashford? I didn't know you were here. William walked down the main aisle slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silent hall with the weight of judgment. He looked tired, grief-stricken, like a man who'd been awake for 36 hours straight watching someone die. But his eyes were burning with a fire that made even Victoria take an involuntary step backward. He walked up the stage stairs without hurrying, without any of the panic that had consumed him at the airport. He walked past Victoria as if she were completely invisible, as if she didn't exist at all in his world. He went straight to Grace, who was standing there staring at him with complete shock and confusion. Hello, Grace, William said gently, his voice soft now, so different from the commanding boom moments before. William? Grace gasped, her hand going to her mouth in disbelief. What are you doing here? How are you? This is my hall, William said simply, the weight of those 4 words settling over everyone like heavy snow. He turned slowly to face Victoria, who was now visibly trembling despite her attempts to maintain composure. Mr. Chairman, we had an intruder, Victoria stammered, trying desperately to explain and justify. She was late. She was inappropriately dressed. She refused to leave when instructed. She was late, William interrupted, his voice like ice cutting through steel without effort. Because she gave her seat on the last flight out of Tulsa to me. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air, no sound coming out at all. I don't understand, sir. What do you mean? William looked out at the empty seats of the hall, then back at the staff and guards who were witnessing this. My wife, Rose, passed away 3 hours ago at Mount Sinai, William announced, his voice breaking slightly. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath in this world. I was there, at her bedside, because this young woman sacrificed her dream for a complete stranger. She didn't know who I was. She didn't ask for money or recognition or any kind of reward. She just saw a man in pain and showed him mercy when no one else would. Tears welled in William's eyes now, but he refused to let them fall, refused to break composure completely. He turned his gaze back to Victoria, and it was a look of pure, devastating moral judgment. You call yourself a judge of art, Victoria? William asked, his voice quiet but carrying perfectly in the acoustics. Art is about humanity. It is about soul. It is about seeing the truth beneath the surface. You looked at this woman and saw dirt, saw something beneath you to be discarded. I see an angel who saved my last moment with my wife. I see the kind of soul that makes true art. You tried to crush the hands that saved my heart. You tried to silence the voice that showed me mercy. Victoria looked around desperately for support, but the guards carefully avoided her eyes, looking at the floor instead. Chairman, please, I was just following protocol and maintaining standards, Victoria begged, her voice cracking now. Your protocol is cruelty dressed up as standards, William declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Your standards are about appearance and punctuality, not about the human soul that creates music. And your tenure at this institution is over, effective immediately. Pack your personal belongings, Victoria. You are fired. You will leave this building within the hour. This is my hall, and you have defiled it with your cruelty and your small-minded judgment. Get out of my sight. Get out of this hall. Get out of my presence. Victoria let out a sob of humiliation and rage combined, all pretense of sophistication completely shattered now. She ran off the stage, her heels clicking frantically on the wood, the sound fading as she disappeared. The heavy stage door slammed shut behind her, and the sound echoed through the hall like a final verdict. William turned back to Grace, who was standing there with tears streaming down her dusty, exhausted face. He walked to the Imperial Grand Piano and, carefully, reverently, opened the lid that Victoria had slammed shut. The mechanism made a soft clicking sound as the lid rose, revealing the strings inside like an instrument's heart. I never got to hear you play, William said softly, looking at Grace with genuine sadness in his eyes. Would you play for me now? Would you play for Rose? Grace looked at him, at this man who had just turned her entire world upside down in a matter of minutes. "It would be my honor," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion and exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude. She sat back down on the bench slowly, her legs shaking, her hands trembling with something beyond adrenaline now. She didn't wipe away her tears. She let them fall freely onto her hands, onto the keys, onto everything. Grace placed her hands on the keys again, but this time there was no anger driving her fingers forward. This time there was only love, only grief, only the universal human experience of loss and memory. She began to play Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, the piece she'd learned when her grandmother died. It was soft, melancholic, achingly beautiful in the way that only music about loss can ever truly be. The notes floated up into the high vaulted ceiling of Adelphia Hall, filling the vast empty space with presence. William sat down on a chair at the side of the stage, closing his eyes and letting the music wash over him. He could see Rose smiling in his mind, could feel her hand in his hand one more time. He could hear her laugh, could remember their wedding day when she'd walked down the aisle to this exact piece. The security guards who had manhandled Grace minutes before now took off their caps and stood respectfully at attention. Even they understood, in some wordless way, that they were in the presence of something sacred and true. The music wasn't just technical perfection, though it was technically flawless in every way that mattered professionally. It was emotional truth translated directly into sound, bypassing the brain entirely, and speaking straight to the soul. Grace played for her mother in Tulsa General Hospital, breathing through tubes, fighting for 6 more months of life. She played for Rose, who had just died, for William, who had lost his entire world in a single morning. She played for every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough because of how they looked. She played for herself, for the 15 years of work, for the sacrifice, for the choice she'd made at that airport. When she finished, the final note hung in the air for what felt like an eternity of perfect silence. William stood up slowly and began to clap, his hands coming together in steady, measured applause. It was just one man clapping in a massive hall that could hold 2,000 people at capacity. But to Grace, sitting there at that piano with tears on her face, it sounded like a standing ovation from the entire world. "Thank you," William whispered, walking over to her and embracing her gently, carefully, like something precious and fragile. "You have the fellowship, Grace. You have everything, whatever you need, it's yours. The prize money, the training, the performance opportunities, all of it. And more than that, you have my eternal gratitude for the gift you gave me yesterday." Grace couldn't speak, could only nod and cry, and let herself be held by this stranger who wasn't a stranger anymore. 1 year later, a magnificent poster hung outside Adelphia Hall's main entrance on the street. It featured Grace Madison wearing a stunning red gown, her hair styled professionally, looking like she'd been born for stages. The text read in bold letters, "The Spirit of Humanity. Grace Madison Piano Recital. Sold out." Inside the hall, in the front row of the sold-out audience, sat William Ashford looking healthier and more peaceful. Next to him sat an older woman in a wheelchair, thin but beaming with pride, Grace's mother from Tulsa. She was frail, still fighting the illness, beaut alive, and here to see this moment she'd sacrificed everything for. On the stage, the magnificent imperial grand piano gleamed under the professional stage lights like a jewel. A small brass plaque had been added to the piano's side, engraved with careful letters. It read, "In memory of Rose Ashford, she heard the music and everything, donated by William Ashford." Grace walked onto the stage to thunderous, deafening applause from the packed house of 2,000 people. She wore the red gown with confidence now, no longer the exhausted farm girl in a wrinkled, stained dress. She bowed deeply to the audience, then turned specifically to William and her mother, and bowed again with gratitude. Before sitting at the piano, she walked to the instrument and placed her hand gently on Rose's memorial plaque. She stood there for just a moment, feeling the cool brass under her fingers, honoring the woman who'd changed everything. Then she sat down on the bench, her posture perfect, her hands hovering over the keys with absolute confidence. She wasn't the farm girl who missed her flight and took a Greyhound bus anymore, running desperately through Manhattan. She was the woman who had made an impossible choice and discovered that mercy was the foundation of all art. She looked up toward the ceiling of the hall, smiled at something only she could see, and began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the hall, but different this time, transformed completely. This time it wasn't anger or desperation, it was triumph, it was joy, it was the sound of a soul finally free. The audience listened in absolute silence as Grace played, every note perfect, every phrase filled with the truth she'd learned. That art without humanity was just noise, that talent without character was empty, that mercy was the highest form of music. William reached over and took Grace's mother's hand gently, and they sat together, watching the miracle they'd both believed in. Grace played, and the music told a story of storms and sacrifice, of cruelty and justice, of death and new life. And in the darkness of the owner's box balcony where William had stood 1 year ago, a single empty seat remained. It was Rose's seat, left vacant in her honor, a permanent reminder that she was still here in the music. Grace's hands moved across the keys, like they'd been born for this moment, for this hall, for this exact purpose. And somewhere, in a place beyond stage-stand audiences and applause, Rose Ashford smiled and listened. If you were in Grace's position at the airport, would you have given up your seat, knowing it might cost you everything? Have you ever sacrificed something important for a stranger who needed help? Should talent and character matter more than appearance and punctuality in how we judge people's worth? Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us about a time someone showed you unexpected mercy. If this story of sacrifice, cruelty, and justice touched your heart, please like and subscribe to our channel. We bring you true stories of redemption, dignity, and the power of choosing kindness over ambition every single day. See you in the next story.